Goldberg to Thinking Aloud. Richard Goldberg is a senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He previously served as senior counselor for the White House National Energy Dominance Council, senior advisor to the Secretary of the Interior, director for countering Iranian weapons of mass destruction for the White House National Security Council, NSC, as deputy chief of staff, senior appropriations associate, and foreign policy advisor to former U.S. Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois, as chief of staff and head of legislative affairs to former Governor Bruce Rauner of Illinois, and as Navy Reserve Intelligence Officer with experience on the Joint Staff and in Afghanistan. He was sanctioned by Iran in August 2020. A former staff associate for the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and a leader in efforts to expand U.S. missile defense cooperation with Israel, Rich played a key role in U.S. funding for the Arrow 3 program, Iron Dome, and the deployment of an advanced missile defense radar to the Negev Desert. He was instrumental in securing the first ever funding for persecuted Christians in northern Iraq and led efforts to reform the United Nations and its related agencies. Richard was a founding staff director to the House U.S.-China Working Group and was among the first Americans ever to visit China's Human Space Launch Center. He also led the Republican staff for several bipartisan congressional member organizations, including the Iran Working Group, the American Caucus, the Commission on Divided Korean Families, and the Congressional Task Force Against Anti-Semitism. In the Senate, Rich emerged as a leading architect of the toughest sanctions imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Featured in the book, The Iran Wars, he was the lead Republican negotiator for 3 rounds of sanctions targeting the Central Bank of Iran, the SWIFT financial messaging service, and the entire sectors of the Iranian economy. Richard also helped lead the fight against the Russia reset, championing military assistance to key Eastern European allies and blocking the Pentagon from sharing classified missile defense data with Russia. I can keep going on and on about Rich's bona fides. I'll just cut to the very end. As an intelligence officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, Richard served as a Navy watch officer in the Pentagon's Command Center, as chief of counterintelligence threats for Reserve Unit, supporting U.S. European Command, and as a senior intelligence officer for an electronic attack squadron deployed to Afghanistan. Perhaps the most important part of this resume is not on. You're a product of Solomon Schechter Day School in Northbrook, Illinois, where you attended with my sister, and Northwestern University, where you were an AEPI and attended with my brother-in-law, Danny. I want to thank Hope and Danny for facilitating this conversation and bringing you back into my life. Some of your biggest fans are here at VBS, including Scott Howard, who is chair of the Rich Goldberg fan club. It is an absolute joy and pleasure to bring you to Valley Beth Shalom and to the greater Los Angeles community. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm glad we were able to make it work.
All right. So I've been waiting for this conversation for a couple of weeks. I'd like to speak with you about Iran. I'd like to focus this whole conversation, this whole episode about.
Is that something going on? Is that in the news?
That's right. I can't imagine how many requests you have right now in terms of conversations like this. But if you had to, let's start with a very specific question, right? How did we get here? Right? How did we get to a point where the United States has 2 aircraft carriers parked right in the neighborhood with all of these jets landing on a regular basis, building up this kind of military force right on their doorstep? How did we get to this moment in time via Iran?
It's a great question. There's a long history, obviously, and there's the short history. We have seen Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, quite distinguished from Iran itself and the Iranian people, this regime, at war with the United States, obviously now for 47 years, since 79, since the revolution. And that has come in all kinds of forms. Obviously, what it means to be the guardian of the revolution, the exporter of the Islamic Revolution, is that on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, this is a regime that is plotting against the West and that is executing on those plots. When we say the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world, that is in fact what it is. And it builds proxies, it builds terrorist groups with great capacity to execute on its terror aspirations, fomenting chaos throughout its neighbors, throughout the region, trying to have its tentacles reach into Europe, into Asia, and even into the United States and the rest of the Western Hemisphere. Its own Revolutionary Guard Corps carrying out this mission, some on its own with IRGC officers abroad, and some coordinating sort of the quarterback of these other terrorist groups, whether it be Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas, obviously, in Gaza, Islamic Jihad, and a host of, they call them militias in the press, but terrorist organizations that exist mostly in Iraq and then some in Syria as well, though since the downfall of Assad, less so there. Okay, so that's been sort of the history, and we go through decades and ebbs and flows of what Iran looks like and how its threat is towards the United States. They have obviously had years now of building not just a terror threat, but a missile threat program in which they started by copying North Korean, Pakistani type missiles, and have copycats that could be for short-range ballistic missiles, then medium-range ballistic missiles, then intermediate range ballistic missiles. Now with a space launch vehicle program, a cover for how to perfect an intercontinental ballistic missile, the logical next step in their inventory of ballistic missiles. Alongside that, continuing to advance from day one until now on their cruise missile capabilities. We saw those on display in the attacks against Israel in 2024 and again last year during the 12-day war. A massive drone armada and manufacturing base, obviously that's been in the news mostly as far as what they provided to Russia to attack Ukraine, but we also saw them use it on their own, attacking Israel multiple times via drones, and obviously what they provided to their terror organs, the Houthis. We've seen used drones against Israel, including direct hits in Tel Aviv, and their other proxies in Iraq and Syria in the past using those drones against U.S. forces, not just against Israel. And then there is the nuclear program, the nuclear threat. And by the way, other potential weapons of mass destruction threats, biological threats, chemical threats, some of those you're starting to finally see coming out into the news, though we've talked about that a little bit in declassified reports over the last few years from the State Department. But the nuclear threat is the main one we've had our eye on now for over 2 decades, since it was revealed. A clandestine nuclear weapons program back in 2003 brought to the attention of the world. Multiple sites involved in this program, a place to be able to build centrifuges, the things that go spinny with uranium, and you feed them into additional centrifuges called cascades. And at the end of the process, you raise the purity level, and you're trying to get up to a weapons grade level, which we consider 90%, though there are cruder devices you can use at lower levels. And we've seen them have sites for the enrichment itself. So they build the centrifuges, they keep working on more advanced centrifuges, they move them into discrete locations, secret locations that then get revealed to the world. The first one was Natanz. The next one that we learned about years later during the Obama administration in 2009 was a deep under mountain facility called Fordo, where they had moved centrifuges in and were enriching uranium there as well. They had other sites as part of the supply chain to fabricate metals needed in this process to convert the uranium to the form of uranium you need for enrichment, and other parts of the value chain and supply chain, all there, from the raw material to the milling, all the way until producing near weapons grade uranium at these very once secret sites that were built for the purpose of a secret nuclear weapons program that was later exposed. What we have seen, obviously, over time is a dual track. That's the one way to produce a bomb, is through enrichment. There's a second way to do it, which is through reprocessing and the use of plutonium for a bomb. Remember, we had 2 kinds of bombs that dropped on Japan. Right. This is not sort of 2026 technology and thinking. This is 1940s way of building weapons, and they had an above ground heavy water reactor for the purpose we believed to produce plutonium in the future for a second dual pathway to the bomb. And then the missile program, which we already talked about, is the delivery vehicle system potentially for that. And then there's a whole complex of nuclear weapons scientists who work in labs and work on computers in sites that we've never seen, never heard about, don't know where they are. Some are in universities, some are street fronts. We started seeing some breadcrumbs of it from the nuclear archives that the Israelis brought out in 2018. So those three pieces there, the production lines to get you fissile material, whether it's enriched uranium or whether it's plutonium, the delivery systems for a nuclear weapon potentially via the missile program, and then the weaponization piece itself, the science behind it, the engineering behind it, the construction potentially behind it, and then of course testing involved in a weapon. Okay, so that threat kept building for years. There was a change in policy of how to deal with that threat. Originally, the Congress led Senator Mark Kirk back in the day, one of the leaders on it, imposing, you talked about the sanctions on Central Bank of Iran, sectors of the economy, really dealing some major blows 15 years ago to the regime. That pressure led to an opportunity to do something as the regime was starting to lose its oil export revenue. The rial, the currency, was crashing. And rather than taking that pressure and building on it to a point of getting the regime to agree to dismantlement or true reversal of some of these threats, or to help the people of Iran use periods of instability to try to help them take back their own country, we defaulted to diplomacy, and we got a nuclear deal that was quite controversial, opposed by the majority of Congress at the time on a bipartisan basis. And that was called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So that was a deal that basically left most of the program intact. Their missile program was not touched. In fact, it was allowed to advance significantly with research and development and testing. The nuclear program, the enrichment sites, all those supply chain sites all remained intact. But by agreement, they had to limit what they could do at these sites for some time period, though R&D for the future could continue. So understanding how to build more advanced centrifuges that could go faster and produce more was happening during JCPOA. All the sites were still there to be able to put more centrifuges in and spin them up more and produce more material over time if they wanted to. And then we never touched the weaponization piece. Never came clean. Never told us what they had done in the past. Couldn't interview people. Couldn't put together sort of chain of custody of things that went missing over time. Sort of a black box. And we sort of went through this. In exchange, we lifted hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars of sanctions, and it was a boon to the Iranian economy for that period of time.
So this is during the Obama era.
This is
one of the great.
This is Obama to Trump.
This is Obama.
Yeah,
so this is one of the great feathers in the Obama cap of diplomacy, was the accomplishment of JCPOA, and why did we want an agreement back then?
So it was, if you talk to people in the Obama administration, you had divergent comments on this. And I think there were different people who backed it for different reasons. There is certainly an ideological camp that simply fundamentally disagrees with certainly my worldview. I think most of your worldviews. For those listening, that is encapsulated, exemplified by somebody who became the special envoy for Iran under the Biden administration, Rob Malley. If you've heard of that name or seen him or seen some of his public statements, this is the internalization that, a lot of the problems in the world are our fault. And Iran has grievances. They were attacked by ballistic missiles during the Iran-Iraq war. Of course they want ballistic missiles. Israel has a bomb. Of course they want a bomb. Pakistan has a bomb. Why wouldn't they want a bomb? Would they really use a bomb? Isn't our involvement in trying to meddle in their society? Didn't we have a coup to take down their leadership in 1953 with Mossadegh and a lot of things, which by the way is not true. this is like a whole thesis of like, we need to say sorry. We need to accommodate their interest and true fears. And by the way, there's an imbalance of power in the region. Why should we have the Sunnis be in the lead while we pressure the Shia? Why should Israel be in the lead over both of them? If there is a balance of power between the Sunnis and the Shia and Israel, then we'll be in equilibrium.
Right.
Sort of a Nixonian, Kissingerian idea.
That's right. So I just want to point back, because in a lot of ways today we think like this is a Democrat idea, that's a Republican idea. And that's not necessarily true, because foreign policy doesn't fit perfectly into one camp or the other. The idea of creating parity and that there would be peace through parity was it sometimes a Republican idea and sometimes a Democratic idea. Right now, it feels like that concept is a Democratic idea. We're going to talk about the kind of ebb and flow of our Iran policy, how it's shifted back and forth.
I think you would have like a on the right, the realist camp that probably would have subscribed to this, like the Mearsheimers of the world, and who have obviously taken on a more prominent role in certain camps of the right today, more than they were a decade ago, where they were really very much a silent minority,
right?
Fringe at the time. There's a growing camp that approves themselves and likes to say that they're realists now, and sort of takes on the Mearsheimer foreign policy on the right. On the left, you had at the fringes, people who, were just empathetic to the Islamic Republic, basically. And so you put those two together, you would have a foreign policy thesis there. I would say for the pragmatists who had no love affair for the Islamic Republic, didn't believe in this equilibrium idea or anything like that, were afraid of Iran. And they would say, well, the supreme leader is in his 70s. He's got cancer. Let's just contain it for now, kick the can down the road, buy ourselves 15 years, see what happens. And Supreme Leader will die at some point, and maybe that will be the moment where we've sort of dangled integration into the world system, and we've created fissures in their camps, and there's a reformist movement that we can work with, and then maybe after Khomeini dies, it's going to be all good.
Right. And that assumption,
there were very serious people who said this to me.
Right. And this assumption that integration would lead to moderation is something that we tried with Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's something we tried with Afghanistan and Iraq. The United States has tried this policy.
China was a major thesis for the CCP. That's probably one of the biggest failures. And this is like a theocracy, a radical Shia theocracy. I mean, it's like not even like the atheist Communist Party of China. It's a whack. To me, it was always a wacko idea, but fine, that was what people thought. And then there is like a non-proliferation crowd in Washington where it's just like, ooh, nuclear weapons bad, nuclear's bad, like arms control. We can get a deal, like kumbaya, of course they'll abide by this deal. This is great. Look at this. The proliferation threat has actually improved. Iran was enriching uranium more before the JCPOA than after the JCPOA. They had more material before the JCPOA than after. Therefore, in the short term, the threat has been mitigated. The threat has been reduced. And obviously those in the opposition camp would say, are you like an idiot? You're just literally paying them $1 trillion over the next decade to grow their program behind the scenes, to then just unleash with economic power, regional power, with their proxies using their budget to dig in throughout the region, whether it's the Houthis becoming a full-fledged army or Hezbollah or whatever it is. And then they say, okay, guess what, guys? We're at 90% now. We're allowed to under the deal. We've paved the way for them to have an industrial-sized nuclear program and missile program and control of the Middle East. That was the crux of the opposition to the deal. To say
that was Prime Minister Netanyahu. That was Prime Minister Netanyahu's argument, is that essentially the United States and JCPOA would essentially be paying for Iran to create a nuclear weapon 10 years later, and that money that all the hundreds of billions of dollars essentially enabled what Israel both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the opposition, Yair Lapid, and Naftali Bennett, the previous prime minister, call Iran the head of the octopus, meaning to say its tentacles reach everywhere throughout the Middle East in terms of these terror networks. And the money of JCPOA helped fund all of those terror proxies all across the region. Exactly. So Hamas's strength, Hezbollah's strength that we saw on the morning of October 7th, we saw all of it, was all money funneled through these tentacles of the octopus, right? That suddenly got its hands on this giant jackpot and was able to fund these proxies to an extent that they weren't. Okay. So now that's the end of the Obama. I'm going to move you quickly so we get to today.
Exactly.
Then we get to Trump.
And then we get to Trump. And the last piece there is the Republican sort of hawkish opposition to JCPOA also had sort of remembering of the 1990s agreed framework with North Korea. There are a lot of parallels between the Clinton administration's deal with North Korea and the Obama administration's deal with Iran.
Right.
And the basic idea was you've got no declaration of their activities and materials and personnel. You don't know what they're working on. You don't know what they're hiding from you. You're taking on face value that this is the threat in front of you. And if you don't have full verification, they're going to be doing something in secret that's not going to be good in the end. And in fact, for North Korea, they had a secret enrichment program. We thought they only had the above ground reprocessing threat at Yongbyon. But in fact, they had secret enrichment sites, and over time they built a bomb and ICBMs, and we knew nothing about it. In Iran's case, what changed fundamentally was in 2018, we're in Trump now, and there's a lot of people saying, let's just stay in JCPOA. Let's play this out. We can fix it around the edges. We can try to negotiate a second round deal with them, whatever it is. And the Mossad had stolen from inside of Iran this massive nuclear archive, which showed that they had curated their entire nuclear weapons plan. And it was a treasure trove of information of where they had done things, where they were still doing things, who was involved. And you saw the International Atomic Energy Agency over the next few years visiting sites, demanding access, taking samples, finding traces of uranium particles, satellite photos of those sites that had just been discovered where they wouldn't let anybody in at first, trucks coming in, stuff being put, containers on trucks, stuff moving out, soil being turned over, hiding something. That's 2018, 2019, 2020. All these investigations are unraveling. And President Trump had obviously at that time campaigned against the deal, had already been opposed to the deal. One of his campaign promises was to get out of the deal. But there were a lot of people thought, oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to replace it with? What's going to happen? They'll be unshackled. What will happen? And what happened was we adopted a maximum pressure campaign, was what he called it. And that was to bring back all the sanctions before the JCPOA and then some. Get rid of all the waivers, all the exceptions, all the wiggle room you gave, and just try to pile on as much pressure, drive their revenues towards zero, destabilize the economy, and then at that point, see if they will capitulate, if you can get a much better deal, or you destabilize them to a point where, in fact, people in Iran can do what you're seeing happen today. The thesis of this entire maximum pressure campaign was very much based on the victory strategy of President Reagan in the Soviet Union context. Comes in, has a secret national security memo, directs several lines of effort against the Soviet Union, economic warfare being a primary tool, also political warfare, diplomatic, political isolation, in international organizations, other things you can do, information warfare, things like that, and then military deterrence. So that was the Star Wars program, things like that made the Soviets, spend too much money on their military and go bankrupt. And then covert capabilities as well to bring to bear for sabotage, defections, all kind of whatever you can do. And people look back and say this was a formative moment. This was not obvious to do. There had been this ideological foreign policy debate similarly to what we've had on Iran that we described. Should we have containment as a strategy? Should we have engagement as a strategy? The idea of total victory, of rollback, of defeat, not just containment, but like actually go for the jugular, destabilize, see if you can bring down the regime, collapse the regime. That was not something that anybody thought was possible, particularly because they had nuclear weapons and we were in a space of two nuclear powers. But Reagan rejected that thesis and went with this, so-called victory strategy. So the maximum pressure campaign, whether you see it or not, had all of those elements in place. And that was the idea, to try to bring all those elements to bear. And we succeeded in 2019 into 2020, really driving their revenues towards zero. And they, for a time, actually had no oil exports for the first time in their history going out, because nobody knew what to do until the Chinese started stepping in and figuring out sanctions evasion. That forced the regime to start cutting budget subsidies that were popular. The first one was gasoline subsidies that they had provided the population for decades. That forced a whole bunch of people into the streets. And similar to what you just saw in January, they shut down the internet. They started just shooting people in the streets. They killed hundreds at the time, maybe in the low thousands, but hundreds for sure. And it stopped. It ended. By the time we could even figure out what was going on, it was already over.
This was in 2020.
This is in November of 2019.
2019.
And there was no Starlink. There were no obvious ways to help people on the ground. There was a maximum pressure campaign, but it was a sign that things can go unstable very quickly. And when the regime senses it, they will resort to maximum violence. And by the way, that wasn't the first time we had seen a mass protest. Remember 10 years earlier, 2009, first year of the Obama administration, there was the Green Movement. There was this mass outpouring onto the streets of Iran, in Tehran specifically, but nowhere else. It was an upper middle class suburban Tehran phenomenon where people were upset with the outcome of the presidential election, if you remember back then. Right. So 2019 was, you stole, where's my vote? 2009 was, where's my vote? 2019 was, where's my paycheck? Where's my money? And that continued to bubble up even as we moved from Trump in 2020 into 2021. Now, what happens in this interim period? Two things. One, Trump killed Soleimani, ordered the strike on Soleimani right after New Year's 2020. That freezes the regime for a year in certain aspects of their escalation, because they are afraid at that point of American military power. And they're continuing low levels of enrichment, breaching their JCPOA limits, but they are afraid to go higher. 2021 comes in, we have a new Biden administration, and the thesis is to go back to JCPOA, but you go first, Iran. You come back into compliance, we'll lift the sanctions. And it was sort of a middle ground, I think, between two camps. One camp said, we're the ones that broke the deal. If we want to go back to the deal, we need to lift all the sanctions and they'll come back into compliance. That's sort of Rob Malley's view. You have Jake Sullivan's view, which is, with like a lot of people in his ear saying, are you really just going to give away this much leverage? You're coming in with maximum pressure and you're just going to like give it all away. You just saw what happened in 2019. Soleimani's dead. By the way, the Israelis had taken out the head of their nuclear weapons program later in 2020 with like crazy robot, killing things in the middle of a street intersection for Kriza Day. Like, they're fragile right now. You're really just going to hand them back hundreds of billions of dollars? It's crazy. And so I think there was this idea of, hey, let's kind of keep the sanctions in place, try to go to the table for a deal. Maybe we even negotiate what was supposed to come next after JCPOA now, since JCPOA is already obsolete, given that they're breaching the JCPOA. And they want our sanctions relief, so let's see what's possible. But let's not push them over the edge. Let's not force them to continue escalation. Let's not send them away. We really do want a deal. Well, the Iranians respond to that by saying, oh, really? Well, let's see. And instead of saying, okay, let's negotiate in good faith, they keep the wheels of motion of negotiations going with the Biden administration, round after round after round of talks. And the Supreme Leader orders a race forward on the nuclear program.
Right. So they used negotiations as a process to buy time, right? Just to put it simply. And like so much of the Jewish institutional world that relied on Jake Sullivan, like I feel like so many of us grew to rely on him to be kind of a voice of reason in the administration. there was a lot happening in the world at that moment as well, right? So when we look back on this period of time, the beginning of the Biden administration, this is a period of topsy-turvy. Wars are beginning all over, right? We have the beginning of go ahead.
Well, really the time they come in a relatively quiet period, other than the JCPOA and potential escalation with Iran. And the president-elect had written an op-ed, sort of laying out, and it was CNN, where he lays out his vision for the Iran policy early on. And the Iranians started testing him during transition already in January of 2021, when they announced they were going to start the production for the first time since before the JCPOA of high enriched uranium at 20%. Within, by the way, a couple of months, they announced we're going to 60%, which had never happened before. And then they started doing it at the second facility in Fordo as well. So 2021 was really just an escalation of Iran, while being at the table offering to go back to a deal. Iran went to a presidential election or selection and switched from, the quote unquote moderate who had delivered JCPOA. Everybody remembers that back in Rouhani's time, and goes with a very stalwart, IRGC aligned defender of the revolution, the hangman of Tehran, as they called him, who had literally, led the judiciary, led kangaroo courts, putting thousands of Iranians to death, in Ibrahim Raisi. And that was sort of a message of, we're doubling down. You want to do a deal with us? There's no more veneer. There's no more pretending. This is the Islamic Republic. This is what we are. You want to give us money? Great. Otherwise, we're racing forward with a nuclear weapon. And they didn't say that, obviously, because it's, they have a fatwa on that, of course. But it was clear that they're now escalating. Then they start limiting inspectors' access from the IAEA. The inspectors find that they've been producing uranium metal for the first time, a component of the actual weapon. This is all 2021, right? We withdraw from Afghanistan, and everybody sort of saw how that went. I don't have to go into it in August and September 2021. And then just a few short months later, early 2022, we have the unprovoked attack and invasion of Ukraine. So the administration is a year into Iran talks and policy when the world starts blowing up.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get to. And not long after this, there's another period of social unrest in Iran.
Correct. Exactly. Right? So later that year, they are at the table throughout 2021. They continue at the table throughout 2022. You're in late summer of 2022, and there are reports that they're close to a deal. A multi-phase deal, and it's all going to lay out, and it's all leaked out, and the Israelis are going crazy, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is really going to happen. And there's talk that they're even going to take the Revolutionary Guard Corps off the terror list as part of the deal. The Iranians had asked for that. Big congressional pushback, and Gold Star families writing letters to Biden saying, please don't do that. And he finally says, okay, I'm not going to take the IRGC off the terror list. That's off the table. But there's still this view of like, it's going to happen. And then right when they're supposed to get a response from Iran and something's supposed to happen, and by the way, this is a period where sanctions are still in effect, but the sanctions aren't being enforced that much. There's a lot of leakage. The oil exports are going through the roof to China. All of a sudden, out of nowhere almost, a spark. As these things, typically happen. The brutality of the regime, the quote unquote morality police that they have that goes around and looks for women who aren't wearing their hijab correctly to their correct standards, finds a young lady, 22 years old, Mahsa Amini, who's on vacation in Tehran with her family, beats her, picks her up, throws her into the back of the van, whisks her away, and she dies. She's dead. She's murdered in detention. And the video goes viral, everything goes viral, and people just take to the streets. And this time, it's not just Tehran. It's not just a few thousand or a few 100,000. It's massive, and it's women-led.
So let's describe around the Ayatollah. There's this group called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, and they are not only empowered to be the private militia, but they are actually ideologically aligned, completely aligned.
Guardians of the revolution, quite literally.
Guardians of the revolution. They are ideologically committed to the Ayatollah's vision. Then even outside of that group, there's this morality police that has to actually walk the streets and monitor, that everybody is keeping the standards that
there's all kinds of subdivisions that the IRGC has and different ways of enforcement, and the judiciary branch has as well. And so the judiciary law enforcement arms have like a morality police that can go out and do this. And the IRGC has its own internal security forces, the Besiege, that are the ones that are the real, if the regular police don't have the stomach for something, the Besiege come in and knock heads, or in this case, open up machine gun fire on tens of thousands of people. And this is life in Iran. This is the brutality of the regime. It's a very repressive regime against women, against minorities, against ethnic minorities and religious minorities. Certainly there are LGBT and others in Iran, and that's just like they don't. It's like the famous, I forget which Iranian president was. There are no homosexuals in Iran, right? Like it's like. Right. It's absurd, but it's bad there.
So how many people get killed to put down this revolution, this social unrest, let's say in 2022? So
this is what's so interesting. The regime doesn't know what to do. It's not as forceful in some ways and immediately obvious that the regime's going to fall because of these protests. There's huge numbers. They're coming out. They're, burning photos. They're burning flags of the Islamic Republic. It's everywhere around the country in multiple cities. And it starts combining people's economic frustrations with their political frustrations. And it's really combustible, but women are really out there at the forefront.
And women are taking off their hijab. Women are taking off their hijab. They're showing their hair for the first time in many years, right?
Exactly. And meanwhile, what's the dynamic here? We got Hollywood celebrities who are coming out, seeing this, just like, I stand with the Iranian women and all that. It actually becomes like a Western thing of like, wow, I really like this. I'm supporting this. The Biden administration's still there. They still want to do a deal. If they have a massive crackdown and just start killing women in the streets that goes viral, I mean, it's over. Like, there's just no way of coming back from that. They have an ideological and religious tension in their own ethos of like, women are sort of special, but they treat them terribly. And so you can't actually just kill the women in the streets. And so they're kind of locked. Plus, the tactics used are different than they were in 2019 or prior uprisings. It's not just one big group that just comes out to a center place. Like you would think of like a rally. These are groups of like 100 that pop up here, 50 over here, cars of 15 people here. They're somehow coordinated, but not coordinated. And it's happening, and they're popping up, and they can't get control of it all very quickly. And so the level of violence in response is nothing like what you just saw in January. It's much lower. It's not to say it didn't exist. And so what they end up trying to figure out to do is okay, how can we like let this keep going, and will it fizzle out at some point if we just keep giving them enough space but don't do anything that provokes international intervention? And what they do is they obviously are mass arresting people all the time. They start having public executions. Execution after execution to show like nobody's coming to rescue you. There is no help on the way. Joe Biden's not sending 2 aircraft carriers. You're on your own. It's getting cold. Winter is coming. And if you keep coming to the streets, you're going to be hanging from that crane over there too. And at some point, it really just starts fizzling as you get into the winter. Because it is cold. And by 2023, you start having observers, certainly those in Washington who are more pro JCPOA type, saying it's over, it's fizzled out, it's time to re-engage for a nuclear deal or something like that. And in fact, 2023, we see certain signs of a lot of money being opened up, relief valves for Iran. In the summer of 2023, a lot of money in Iraq gets opened up by waiver from the United States. Money gets transferred in a hostage deal to Qatar. And then we're into October 7th, just a month later. And now there's a seven front war that Iran is clearly waging post October 7th. And I think you're in the more recent history now of.
So I just want to point out, so that seven front war does prompt President Biden to send an aircraft carrier. And I just want to point these things out because some of these tropes have been tried before. So when we're sitting here and we say how did these things come about? This isn't the first time that we sit in this scenario.
He sent an aircraft carrier immediately, actually for the Hezbollah front, right? As I recall, because the fear was that there was going to be a full scale opening up by Hezbollah, and they wanted to prevent that. There was the first idea of would there be a preemptive strike by Israel that was proposed by Defense Minister Gallant, and the Biden administration heavily opposed that and said we'll send a carrier strike group in as a deterrent, and we will send messages that we will in fact attack and defend Israel against attack from Hezbollah if that were to occur. So that happens. There's like a lot you could talk about during the Biden years, good and bad. Some contribute to the problem, some try to help the problem. There's aspects of I always think rather than having an American perspective, you should always look at the playing field from Iran's perspective. Mm-hmm. And so whether you think something's well-intentioned, is the right policy, is not the right policy, it's sort of irrelevant. Like to our domestic politics and view, all that matters is what the Ayatollah thinks and sees and how he calculates it and then determines a strategy and then implements a response. And so for the Ayatollah, he's balancing, what is our pressure right now? What is the American posture towards us? None of the sanctions relief has really gone away. The spigots that were opened are still available to us. At the Security Council, nobody's triggered the snapback of UN sanctions. The clock on the JCPOA sunsets is still ticking. In fact, just days after October 7th, one of the embargoes on Iran, the missile embargo on Iran, expired, went away. Nobody did anything about it. So he's sort of seeing this, and meanwhile, because of the politics of the United States and the pressure that triggers on Israel to be more restrained, to try to find a ceasefire opportunity, to not open up another front in Hezbollah, try to get a ceasefire with Hezbollah. I mean, there was a lot of work going on to just try to contain, de-escalate, get to a ceasefire on all fronts. Hostage deal, ceasefire with Gaza, some sort of a ceasefire deal that Amos Hochstein was negotiating throughout 2024 in Lebanon, and just sort of freeze it. Right? There's a presidential election coming. There's a lot of things going on. We still have this Russia war going on. We don't want to deal with this. Let's contain this.
So as we stop, Israel's engaged in fighting all of the tentacles, basically, but not Iran directly. Right? Not Iran directly.
Until 2024.
The United States wants to keep that status quo. The United States doesn't want Iran and Israel to directly engage with each other. And then a series of events occur that kind of bring the unthinkable into reality.
Yeah. So my view is all of that creates a calculation by the supreme leader that actually this is my moment to escalate. I will have the ability to cross Rubicons that nobody ever thought I could cross and get away with it because of the domestic environment in the United States at the moment. And so for the first time in history, Iran launches a direct strategic attack against the state of Israel from its own territory, not from its proxies. They're not relying on the Houthis or Hezbollah. There is a ballistic missile, cruise missile, and drone attack in the spring of 2024 that just lands directly on Israel. The United States, to their credit, comes to the defense of Israel, helps thin out the threat, historic defense of Israel coordination.
So President Biden employs CENTCOM for the first time ever, to help create and fortify for Israel. Yeah. It didn't alleviate, let's just be clear, the Israeli Air Force is who was responsible for defending Israel, but the they alleviated many of the missiles far from Israel's border through
American fighter jets too, by the way. American fighter jets are up in the sky.
American
They're
fighter
working
jets,
with Israelis.
Jordanian fighter jets. There were many
British fighter jets.
Right.
And what they can do is they can shoot down the drones.
There are rumors that there was even somebody
cruise missiles.
Yeah. So they tried to help the best that they could.
So they're willing to work on the defense of Israel's side. But what happens is at the end of it, what has just occurred, right? Iran has just conducted a strategic attack against Israel for the first time in history. What is the consequence for that? Well, Israel is restrained and they are, we still need to get to a ceasefire. So the compromise is we'll send one little symbolic missile through that hits a radar to try to tell the supreme leader, like, we're not going to respond big this time as a favor to Joe Biden, but don't mistake what we could do to you right now. Well, of course, the supreme leader mistakes and says, well, look, they didn't do anything to me. I just got away with it. Nothing has changed. And so this actually occurs later in the year again. But two things change all of a sudden. One, at some point, Prime Minister Netanyahu, with his security cabinet, decides that Israel can no longer sustain this sort of feeling of being pinned down, of just being in a ball from all those other fronts of Iran while just focusing on Gaza. And Gaza is slowing in and of itself, and there's international pressure and American pressure, and it's just, my goodness, like I personally, as somebody who had watched this for so many years, would give webinars like this where I really felt mid 2024 into late 2024 like this was a doom loop. Like if things just stop where they are right now, Israel is not going to be long for this world. Like I really felt that way. Things were not going well, and the entire script is flipped. I mean, the nahafohu, right? You go from being on defense on 7 fronts, maybe offense on 1 in Gaza, but really defense in almost all the other ones, and feeling like you're restrained and there's handcuffs on and you can't fight back, to a surprise, stunning first covert blow to the command and control and communications of Hezbollah through the famous beepers and then walkie-talkies exploding. And then very shortly thereafter, the surprise attack on the bunker of the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and all of his top echelon, completely paralyzing Hezbollah and allowing the Israeli Air Force to have their way and ground forces to come in and clear out tunnel infrastructure and other threats along the border of Lebanon and Israel. This changes the dynamic in so many ways.
So how much, because I don't think people can really grasp, right?
Yeah.
Iran spends how much money supporting Hezbollah every year? It is reported to be in the realm of how much?
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So Iran, rather than just for all of us to understand, rather than supplying their people with food or water or education or any of the things that a government is supposed to do, they take this money in a time when there's restraints on Iran themselves in terms of economic restraints. Whenever they get this jackpot of cash, they take it and they send it into the let's say the tunnel, just to keep the same motif, right? They send it through to Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and all of these organizations to keep them running. And once Israel finally neutralizes Hezbollah, it's not only that they neutralize Hezbollah, they crush this massive investment that Iran has procured.
Exactly. It is the OG of their terror proxies, right? This is on Israel's border. It's a massive army. The actual numbers themselves dwarf Hamas, but then their capabilities dwarf Hamas. You're not talking about homemade rockets. You're talking about actual strategic weapons, not just long-range rockets, but short-range ballistic missiles, precision-guided munitions that have kits that were put onto traditional rockets and made them precision-guided so they can hit exactly where they're targeting. Huge drones to be able to swarm Israel. Cruise missiles that we saw fired way back in the 2006.
And the beeper operation happened at what time?
So this is in September of 2024.
Right. And that
The
follows.
only reason I know that exactly is because I landed in Israel the morning of the beeper operation.
And so September of 2024, just to paint a picture for people, to show that these things are all linked, right? When Israel starts going on the offensive to show Iran, like, this time of us cowering and protecting ourselves from you is over. Now it's time for you to feel, unnerved. It's not only the beeper operation. The beeper operation is on the heels of murdering Haniya, thank God, neutralizing Haniya, one of the leaders of Iran, who was enjoying a vacation, let's just say, right, in Iran itself. Right. So if you didn't understand that we could shoot missile and take out your ground defense, whatever forces, you'll understand that we have the ability to kill people inside of Tehran when they're on vacation there, enjoying themselves. We have the ability to neutralize Hezbollah. This is the beginning of the turn of the war.
And remember, the first attack back in April that the Iranians had conducted on Israel was ostensibly in retaliation for Israel hitting IRGC commanders in Damascus.
Syria,
they said it was their consulate, it was an embassy, it was the diplomat, they're like their IRGC office. They killed them all.
Right.
That's fine. They said, now you've attacked the actual diplomatic corps of Iran. Like we have a right to retaliate, and so that's what they used to launch the attack. The second time, you're talking about Haniya and the strike that took him out incredibly in Tehran, and the response again comes in. So you've had the beepers, you've had this incredible surprise attack. While Netanyahu, remember, is at the UN, right? He's phoning it in like, go launch. So nobody thinks anything's coming. So you're all in September. You've changed the dynamic now in September. They go and launch the attack on Haniya. You start feeling like, wow, there's like so much going on in Israel's favor. Like they got their mojo back all of a sudden. Like, where did this all come from? Finally, they're executing. Well, Iran says, well, you just launched an attack in our soil. We can respond again. So they lob another volley, October 1st, I think, of their ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones at Israel. Again, there's a Defense of Israel coordination from the United States. But this time, the Israelis have changed the entire strategic paradigm. Because Hezbollah is cut down the way they are, first of all, Iran can't rely on them to be their deterrent threat against Israel near term on their border. And secondly, Israel doesn't have to fear that front opening up if they retaliate in a much more aggressive way to what Iran had done to them back in April. And so despite it being probably immense pressure from the White House, I mean, you're weeks away from a presidential election. This could absolutely explode. The Iranian attack comes in, and the Israelis respond in a much more aggressive way, actually sending fighter jets believed to have crossed into Iranian airspace and destroying a whole set of strategic air defense sites that the Iranians had, opening up corridors where Israel, the Israeli Air Force, could potentially own the skies in and out of Iran to conduct follow-on strikes in the future that obviously we saw happen last summer. So that's the context coming into Trump. I know this is a long time to have to build up to this.
This is a long buildup. That's why I'm trying to move it. So Trump comes into office, and Israel not long after launches the 12-day war.
Right. So there's obviously a reconstitution of maximum pressure. One of the early orders from the president is to reconstitute maximum pressure. There's clearly, in secret, major coordination going on with the Israelis for what would become the 12-day war. We see a diplomatic process publicly and negotiations going on and everybody fretting, oh my gosh, is Trump just going to do a nuclear deal now? What's going to happen? And then in the midst of these nuclear negotiations, Israel opens up massive surprise attack on the first night, totally takes everybody by surprise, combined assassinations on the ground, Mossad operations, other kinetic actions going on, we think, from inside of Iran. Iran, sabotage operations, cyber attacks, and the Israeli Air Force opening up simultaneously in one night, killing upper echelons entirely of the command and control of the regime and the IRGC specifically, crippling their immediate response capabilities. There's even incredible stories of sending fake text messages to people to, hey, something's happening, come to the meeting, and people coming to a meeting that they then attack the meeting and kill everybody in the meeting. I mean, just the first 2 days of the 12-day war are probably the most breathtaking. And then it becomes 10 days of just going down your target list. And at the end of that, President Trump authorizing a strike of B-2 bombers to hit the enrichment sites, the key enrichment site being Fordo, the one that really needed a U.S. platform and a U.S. weapon to hit deep underground. Clearly, the Israelis either didn't have confidence in their capabilities or didn't have them in hand to actually deploy. This had always been a question mark for years. Can Israel on its own hit Fordo? Well answered now that the United States did it. And we now have a follow-on effect from that war. Okay, so in the same way that late 2024, Israel attacking and taking out the strategic air defense of Iran left the Ayatollah with no clothes. You now have the Ayatollah, like, if he had any clothes left, they're all for sure gone. The people see it. The people now see it. And the economic situation is deteriorating as sanctions pressure continues. And there's other mismanagement that's creating more unrest in the water supply of Iran. This has gone into a disastrous doom loop where people just can't get enough water. The power grid is deteriorating rapidly. They're having brownouts and blackouts going on throughout the rest of 2025. And banks are starting to run out of money. You're starting to see a bank collapse at the new year. The UN, our European allies, post-war, no longer are held hostage by the threat of Iran going quickly to 90% and having a nuclear breakout. So they finally support the snapback of UN sanctions after all these years. And the UN snapped back. So the Security Council snaps back and brings back all the sanctions diplomatically on Iran. So all the different pieces that maybe we tried to do in the first Trump administration of maximum pressure are actually now on steroids. The political warfare is back and on steroids. The diplomatic isolation, economic effects are being compounded by the regime's own mismanagement in a whole new way. The military deterrence is at a whole new level. We've actually had military action, and whatever covert might be going on from the Israelis is still going on. That brings us into this year, brings us to what's in front of us. And so at a historic moment of weakness and vulnerability for this regime, we suddenly see millions of people come out into the streets. It starts small and then builds very quickly over the first week of January until we get to the point where we are told from everybody who saw this and analyzed this, more people than 2009 across all cities, not just in Tehran, making it the largest, widest uprising in the history of the country since 1979. And the regime sees this before we do. I understand that first night of the millions being out there, it's like a Thursday night, the regime saw that there were enough people to take over the government institutions. Like, even if you fought back and you opened fire, like, there's just too many people. And they're not leaving. And now the president of the United States is making threats and offering support. And this guy means business. He might actually intervene. So they open up some, break the glass. This is an emergency, right? Shut down the internet, come out to the streets and indiscriminately fire on people to a level of tens upon tens of thousands of dead in 48 hours. A level of mass killing not seen since the Einsatzgruppen in Kyiv. And so just to understand just the level of violence that just occurred in January, it is mind-blowing. That is what this regime is capable of.
So whether it's some report 20,000, some report 40,000, however many died in that very short period of time, right?
Yeah. The president says 32,000 now.
The president says 32,000. Okay. So whatever it is, how did we stand with the people, or did we stand with the people during this time? Because this is 6 weeks later.
This is an ongoing, right? So now we're where we are. Okay, I know it took us an hour to get here, but I hope you stayed with us, because this is it. You have to really understand all these ups and downs, ebbs and flows of how we got here. Because a lot of people always say to me, like, I get it. This is 1940s technology. Didn't they already get the bomb? Like, how did this? It's like, well, actually, there's this period of Mossad operations, and then this happened, and then we had JCPOA, and then so it's like, it's not such a clear line on these things. And you have to know what you did in the past to know what you're going to do in the future. And the president set a red line that something would happen very bad to the regime. He said it implied military action if they were to mass murder people in the streets. Well, they did that. He then thought and said that, well, they've stopped executions because of my threats. Well, we've seen plenty of evidence that they've continued executions at secret sites, et cetera. Like, people are getting killed in their hospital beds. There's some horrific stories that are out there. I'm not even going to share them with your viewers, but like, there's bad stuff that they continue to do. And by the way, there's an uprising that's back right now on college campuses. The students are having an uprising over the last several days, and the media doesn't want to talk about it. We could say why. So the president has to act. He set a red line. It's sort of like Obama in Syria, right? With the use of chemical weapons. He set a red line. He's expected to follow through on the red line. Now, obviously, there's a context to all of this. A couple of things have now happened in January. Prime Minister Netanyahu went to Mar-a-Lago at the end of December and stayed through New Year's, meeting with President Trump. What was the purpose of the meeting? Well, if we look back at the record, it was about Iran's missile program, and that it was racing back forward, reconstituting from the 12-day war with the help of China, and was going to become a major threat again that needed to be dealt with. And there was also a warning from the president that if he sees any evidence of continued reconstitution of the nuclear program, he would act immediately.
And just to peel everybody back, if we started from the very beginning, right, the reason that Israel is ultimately so valuable for the United States is it is the tip of the spear in the Middle East for Western civilization. And kind of Cold War mentality, there were always bad actors supplying all these Arab nations with weaponry to be the tip of their spear and to see this play out. So now we have a whole, whether we want to call it an axis of evil or any more, we'll call it something different, but we have a bunch of bad guys on a side who are all trying to prop Iran up the best that they can to not fall in fear that they would be next.
Yeah, at FDD, we call it the axis of aggressors, who then have an axis of enablers as well. I put Iran into the axis of aggressors, and so you actually have a direct coordination. You can actually, a couple of my colleagues are working on some incredible products right now that hopefully will come out soon that really go into deep dives on this, of how Russia, China, Iran, even North Korea all work together in coordination in various aspects of their aggression against the United States. And then you had like Venezuela and others that are part of this axis as a major enabler and implementer. You think all of those actors, minus North Korea, had some presence in Venezuela pre-Maduro operation. But that brings me to the second piece here. What else happens in January, right as everything is happening here? So there's already sort of an idea of there might be military action against Iran this year because of their nuclear reconstitution, but especially because of their missile program. And the president acknowledges that in early January. Well, now an uprising is starting, and the president has a red line, and he's got to act, and he asks for options. But it turns out that he had just conducted another like ridiculous, going to be a movie, operation in Venezuela, taking out Maduro. And that had required a whole buildup and a whole line of effort and plan and sequencing that involved a huge amount of naval assets moving to the Caribbean. And so at that moment, we have a carrier strike group in the Indo-Pacific. We have a carrier strike group, a couple down on the Atlantic side. And we got nothing in the Persian Gulf, in the Arabian Sea, in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean. 1 or 2 destroyers. That's what we have. And with 1 or 2 destroyers, what can you do, plus any available air assets that are already in the region? What can you do quickly? What could Iran do in response to what you can do? And what can you do about their response in that moment with just these one or two destroyers. At that point, you look at the picture and you say, I probably have to just do something symbolic, try to talk them down from a big escalation, try to defend against the smaller escalation that they respond with, and then see what comes next. Well, that doesn't sound very transformative. Yeah, you'd immediately enforce your red line, but you wouldn't really do anything game changing. And maybe you'd also remove your political opportunity to do what you wanted to do this year on a much bigger strategic level on their missile program and their nuclear program. And so we see the president, whether he actually had bombers in the air or not, and there's different reports. There's clearly a decision to open up a new line of effort and start putting new assets in place to open up his option set. And so first you see the carrier strike group move from the Indo-Pacific to the area near Iran, the Arabian Sea. And then where you think that, okay, he's just got one carrier strike group ready to go, he then starts signaling, I'm now moving another carrier strike group away from Venezuela and moving it also to the Middle East. That carrier strike group is not there yet. It is, depending on when you all view this, it is chugging along in the Mediterranean. It's close to Israel. It could transit the Suez. We don't know whether that's the intention, but if it has to transit the Suez, go down the Red Sea, wave hi to the Houthis, and move into the Arabian Sea. And by the way, that waving hi to the Houthis is a high-risk proposition. You don't know what they would do. That point could still be several days away, if that's what he wants to be force postured for. And in the meantime, very similar to pre-12-day war, we see this new game playing out of rounds of talks with the Iranians over their nuclear program and attempts over their missile program that supposedly they're rejecting. And of course, you're seeing these things reported in the news of, well, the Iranians have offered that they would suspend enrichment for 3 years and move. And it's sort of like, suspend enrichment for 3 years. The president just bombed their enrichment program. So did the Israelis. Like, they are suspended probably for 3 years just by military action. I don't understand. What are they offering us exactly? On their missile program, are they going to dismantle their missile program? Are they going to actually destroy missiles? Are they just going to promise not to use them in a bad way? Are we going to address terrorism now? What are we doing on the repression apparatus? It seems hard to imagine what comes out of that process that the president could accept and declare victory on. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm not saying there might not be a bad deal that emerges. It seems hard to believe. It equally, at this point, seems hard to imagine the regime just saying, come get everything. Here's every site we've ever had. Here's every piece of equipment. Here's all of our missiles. Just take it. We're good. God bless you. We don't sponsor terrorism anymore. That Islamic Revolution thing, like, it's just a fad. We're okay. So that doesn't seem likely to happen either. And so the tea leaves would suggest we are heading towards some major military action. What it looks like, who it targets. It's a wide target set. It could be just the strategic threats like the missiles, any reconstitution on the nuclear we're concerned about. There is a nuclear site that was not hit during the 12-day war. You can Google this. It's called Pickaxe Mountain. It's being built to be deeper and more impenetrable to military strike than Fordo. It's nearing completion. Doesn't have anything in it yet that we know of, but it's going to be an enrichment site in the future. That did not get hit. We might want to hit that and collapse it all. And obviously on their missile program, there's a ton of sites. Question is, are we going after Khomeini? Don't know. Are we going after command and control of the entire regime to try to give people on the streets another attempt to come out? We don't know. Do people on the streets actually have the capability to take back the government? Does the so-called crown prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, does he have an actual network that can just grab control of power? Maybe. We don't know.
So let's pause here for a second, because Los Angeles is home, I think, to the largest Persian community in the United States, and the Persian Jewish community is a community I have great affinity for. Our kids have been raised here, have so many close friends who are Persian, and I often hear from them, of course, this deep desire for the Ayatollah to fall, which everyone should share across the world who cares about humanity, justice, democracy, anything. The question, though, is if the Ayatollah falls, right? If Colin Powell once famously said, if you break it, you own it. Okay. And that was his warning about the Iraq war. If the Ayatollah falls, we have here living in the United States in New York luxury, the Crown Prince, who says, I'm ready to come back at a moment's notice. I also believe, based on everything that I've read, that there's no proof that he's going to come back and instate himself and be able to take control. How do we know that we don't end up with ISIS or Muslim Brotherhood or some other horrible actor in Iran in control as a result of the Ayatollah falling?
Let me posit the pro Pahlavi case, and then the sort of unknowns and other possible outcomes. The pro Pahlavi case is he has over the last month upped his game, I would say, to a level we have not seen before. He really took a back seat during the Mahsa Amini women's uprising, and that displaced a lot of his former supporters. There's a lot of people in the diaspora upset with him over that. So you see a lot of venom, cast his way from parts of the diaspora that are not, absolute monarchists. And so that's a problem that they have right now in their strategic communications. But that is not what has happened now. For somebody who sort of originally thought he's out, he's not going to be a part of the future, he just wants to take himself out and live in America. He's now asserted himself throughout the protest movement, demonstrated an ability to actually get responses from the street. Like, this is verified. It's not like, oh, maybe he has supporters. Like, we can see with our own eyes. These are verified videos. There are people who have calls that he went on social media channels that the Iranians could access and say, go out tonight and say the following things. And they went out that night and said the following things. There are people waving his flag in the streets, the pre-1979 Iranian flag in the streets. The people on the college campuses appear to be pro-Pahlavi in their rhetoric right now that we're seeing in the last few days. So there is something there. He has then also been publishing the most detailed transition documents that anybody's actually done. This is really good work. Clearly, like a lot of thinking over the last couple of years to answer the question of what comes next. And it's gotten almost no press. He puts it on social media. You can find it. You can go read it. I mean, these are very detailed, well done. Like, we're going to keep all these technocrats in place here. We're going to do a transition here. We're going to do this. Multiple pillars, economic, social, blah, blah, blah. Transition to election timelines, like all kinds of stuff. And his own statement is that I am not the Shah. I'm not coming back as the Shah. I'm not in charge. But if there is sort of a feeling of goodwill towards who I am, what my family is, what I represent, being the anti-regime best known figure, and I want to say everyone's in the tent. If you're the only condition I set, he says, is territorial integrity of Iran. Like, we are Iranian. We you don't have to be Persian. You have to subscribe to, like, you're an Iranian. Like, this is a beautiful, deep history. We're not breaking up the country. We're not going to separatist movements. We're not doing that. If you're antithetical to, like, having a government, if you're communist, whatever, like, that's a different thing. But if you want to be at the table here and pushing forward, like, great. So I'll be the figurehead.
So you think, as opposed to his father, who was a king, basically, the Shah's and they're basically monarchy, you think he's going to instate like a Jeffersonian democracy all of a sudden?
If you read his plans, I don't know if it'll be Jeffersonian, but it'll be Iranian, and he has and there is, like, what's interesting about Iran in their system. Because a lot of people just are like, well, Iraq, look what happened. And Afghanistan, look what happened. This is a completely different country, a completely different culture. Right. They're Persian culture. I mean, this is like an ancient culture. And even under this regime, the way that this regime has continued to try to control the population and keep people feeling like they at least have some way of validating their feelings, has been actually keeping people going to the ballot box every 4 years. They actually do vote. They're used to voting. Now, they don't get to vote for the right people. It's pre-selected. The outcome is prejudged. But there's an actual campaign. There's speeches. There's debates. They go to the ballot box and they claim they had an election. So the idea of voting is not foreign to the Iranian citizen. Like that's there. That's not hard to reinvent. Having a constitution that is actually written in their favor, rights that are actually enforced in their favor, while preserving the technocratic bureaucracies of government, not having a full like debathification, right? Like everyone in the Ministry of whatever energy is fired. You're all regime people. That's definitely a way to collapse and go into chaos very quickly, and has been part of the thesis in Venezuela so far of like keep the government intact, move it along at basically gunboat diplomacy towards transition. I think that's the thesis of where they're trying to move Venezuela. The fear here, of course, is that you would try to replicate Venezuela in Iran and say, okay, as long as Ali's out of the picture, like I'll be good with this guy, who's close to the supreme leader, who's the Guardian Council puts up or whatever. Problem is that layer, that echelon, that's just total radical Khomeiniist or Islamic Revolution type people. Like if you can get down into that middle area of the actual, just like, I'm just doing my job, even though I obviously serve the supreme leader, you're at a different level of like who can do things and take over. Now that's the rosy picture. Okay. That's the Pahlavi vision.
And why do you think Pahlavi doesn't get more press in the United States? I think he gets more press in the Israeli press than he does in the American press. I think
it's possible. It's possible. I mean, I see him on Fox News a lot. I do see him on Fox. I don't see him on much more. Maybe CNN's had him on. In the end, he has an audience of one, right? So he's really just messaging to the president of the United States, who nobody knows what his decision is going to be, and he wants to influence like everybody else. Everybody else knows that they have an audience of one. So like, what's your communications plan? It's going to be wherever I can go to speak to President Trump, and he's going to hear me, or his people around him will hear me.
Has he ever met with President Trump?
The president said that Steve Witkoff met with him. I think that just came out a few days ago. But the president has not understood. The president's statement has been nice guy, like him. Maybe he can do things. Not sure. Right. He's hedged.
It's like a good impersonation. Yeah. Okay.
He's not had the full embrace, but you're right. There are other contingencies. One is you just get another mullah, right? You just get the next Khomeini. You didn't take them all out. They keep the system relatively intact. They just say, okay, here's the next guy. They have a succession plan in place. You didn't disrupt it. You go forward. By the way, if you kill everybody in the succession plan, then they actually probably are a little bit of crisis. We saw that because we don't have the president of Iran today that Khomeini wanted. One of the things that happened to them along the way, which of course could be part of how this house of cards has fallen apart, is Raisi went down in a helicopter crash.
Right.
Unexpectedly. And that's how the Israelis ended up getting Hania, right? Because he went to the funeral. And so Raisi clearly was part of the plan. He had something to do, and I don't know what it is. He had something to do with the supreme leader's chess moves. And taking him out unexpectedly, and then having to figure out who's going to be the guy now, what's he going to do, and the current president's a total mope. Like, just I think at that point they like, okay, we can't have another Raisi. We just went through all this protest movement. There could be war in the future. Like, let's have somebody that mollifies the West again as a former reformist, whatever. And that's how you get Pezeshkian. So
at one point, the Ayatollah was preparing for his condo in Moscow, right? That's what we were reading about.
I don't know if that's true, but sure.
Okay, so he was preparing to sell his assets. He was, let's in a James Bond villain sense. There's a building where like Assad lives and Ayatollah will live, and all of them will live in Moscow, and they'll all live together.
The one thing is, there's in a time like this, just remember there's a lot of information warfare. There's a lot of stuff to create psychological warfare and all that, and they don't know what's real.
That's disappointing. I always imagine this villain, this James Bond villain HOA meeting that would happen in the building's lobby when they all get to argue about
Assad has a condo.
Yeah.
Like there's other condos in the building, like it's available.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So if you believe it, or even if you don't believe it, the Ayatollah probably has some backup plan of where he's going to go. A lot of these people do. When totalitarian governments fall, a lot of them have plans of how they're going to get out. They've thought of this before. This isn't the first time that this crosses their mind.
He's willing to be martyred, by the way.
Or he's willing to be martyred. Okay.
Or he's accepted that he will be a martyr and he likes that idea. It's possible also. We should not discount that possible. This guy is waiting for the hidden imam. Like, I mean, it's possible.
So if the crown prince comes in, let's say that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that there's somebody crazier in the wings, right? Sure. Who's younger and waiting to take over. And this would be an opportunity for him to grab the IRGC and say, now I'm the Darth Vader character.
I think worst case scenario, honestly, is like some sort of dissension to chaos and multiple groups and armed groups and factions and a balkanization type event. And the Azeris are doing their thing, and the Kurds are doing their thing, and the Baluch obviously are already have a terrorist group there, and Baluchistan, they're doing their thing. They're already trying to separate. And that could devolve into a civil war like Syria. Like that's what happened to Syria for more than a decade. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine it being Syria-esque in Iran. I mean, just culturally, but it could be very complicated and messy. I just don't know what happens. Other actors enter that space, etc. By the way, I don't think this is a likely scenario. That is a scenario that I think would be one of the worst cases. And so keeping territorial integrity, keeping a system in place, not allowing chaos, it should be a priority. But in terms of things that just stay in place, people have talked about either just, different furniture on the Titanic, different mullah, or the IRGC, which owns half of Iran's economy, controls it through its front companies, just says we're in charge now. And it becomes some sort of a pseudo military dictatorship. But still the Islamic Republic, but the IRGC is just in charge fully instead of the mullahs. So they kind of move the mullahs to the side. You actually report to us now. We don't report to you now. And we're in charge. I've never fully understood that argument, only because, as we said earlier, their whole reason for being is to guard the revolution and to guard Khomeini's vision. And Khomeini's vision includes the supreme leader and the mullahs and this whole ideology and this whole religious viewpoint. And so if they were to just be like, hey, we're just a military dictatorship now, they've kind of rejected the Islamic Revolution. It's just in name only, and they're doing their own thing for money. And I don't fully agree that the upper echelons of the IRGC have that perspective. I think they are true believers. However, it's possible. So another theory of the case that's been put out there. At that point, are you worse off? Are you better off? I don't know. It's now we have a different dictator with different names, and it's a little more straightforward of their decision making process, maybe something like that. And then in the end, what does it matter if the regime itself is still sort of there, only somebody else is in charge in some other way? What matters is, what's the status of the missile program? What's the status of the nuclear program? What's the status of their Navy and their other threats to the United States and to the region? If those are actually continue to be degraded or destroyed for years to come, it's a little bit of a lesson. It's going to always be there. They're going to rebuild. It's going to be a long-term threat you're going to have to monitor. But certainly you transform the region and the world very quickly if you eliminate their most strategic threats. And certainly, though, one would have to think that if you really get rid of all those threats, continue to strangle them, and do other command and control precision strikes, if there is a plan to help the people will do something. What that is unclear.
Okay, Rich, it took us about an hour and a half to get to this point, a little bit over an hour. Right now, let me finish with two final questions.
Yeah. Is this the longest one you've ever had? Am I the longest?
It could be. It could be. But
this is like the Yom Kippur.
This is the Yom Kippur of thinking aloud. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
What's your prediction? If you had to predict how this is going to unfold over the next couple of weeks, what is the Rich Goldberg prediction in terms of what happens with the Iran situation?
I would say I have my gut and my brain, right? So my gut tells me the decision was already made a long time ago, and we are just seeing it all play out, and it will end in some sort of a military action. What happens next, I can't fully predict, because I can't fully predict what the military action is and what the strategic objective was and what its impact and outcome is. And it's like a decision tree from there of like, well, if this, then this. Okay. But it would seem that you wouldn't move this many forces to the region after your red line's been obliterated, after already considering military action this year for strategic reasons. The president's statements in the State of the Union, while brief, were actually more extensive than any in history on this issue, and seem to be presenting a defensible case for the inevitability of a military strike, reminding the American people of the regime as a terrorist sponsor, American blood on its hands, the missile program having an intention of an ICBM program to reach the United States, and him having previously declared a red line of no nuclear reconstitution. And for the first time saying out loud at the State of the Union, they are reconstituting the nuclear program. What that means, we don't know. What that's based on, what he declassified to say that, I don't know. But there's something that he claims that they're concerned about there. So they've tripped a second red line already. And he publicly stated 32,000 people were murdered. That's a big number. That's the first time he's put an actual number of that size on it in recent days. So all of those give me indicators of where we're heading. And we're just waiting on the USS Ford to be where General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, wants it to be. Now, that could be wrong, because my brain also watches what's happening. And it disagrees with my gut a lot on a 24-hour news cycle basis with all the crazy leaks that come out. And I mean, some of the stories the last few days are just like, I mean, my head's spinning, right? Your head's spinning. I'm not on the inside. I'm not in the room. I don't actually know. I just know what I know in the past. I was in rooms in the past. I have been in rooms in the past. I've seen this president and his decision making and the process and how he thinks, especially on this issue. And so that leads to my gut. But yeah, they're going back to another round of talks. There's all kinds of discussions of, can they do the military operation, or there's their dissenting views on it, or what's the role of the Qataris and the Saudis in lobbying, the president not to do something and inducing him into a deal in Oman or in Geneva. And could he really, like, in his mind, be told by people, this is a great deal, it's historic, we're getting something nobody got before. And then we look at it and say, this is ridiculous. How did you agree to this? It's possible. I find it unlikely. If that happens, I'll oppose it if the merits warrant. But at this point, given the extraordinary difference in policy approach and past precedent, I have given a lot of deference and latitude to the president over the last few weeks, and I remain confident that he set a red line and he intends to enforce it.
This is not your job usually, but I'll end with this question. If you had a message to the Iranian Jewish community here in Los Angeles, to the Persian community, what would it be? Do you have a message of hope, of optimism? Do you have a message of standing in solidarity with the people of Iran that want change? How would your sermon, what would it look like?
Well, first of all, I would say to you, you have the greatest authority of voice and stature in the United States to speak up and talk about what is happening. Get on media. If you need help, give me a call, give others a call. There is really a regime puppet organization called the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, and some of its former leaders who were completely, thrown out of Washington were reborn in new, realist, isolationist foreign policy roles. The Quincy Institute, a magazine that claims to be conservative but is sort of Buchananite, isolationist. Trita Parsi being the person in mind. There are these people out there in Washington who get on the news, get on CNN, Vali Nasser at Johns Hopkins, and they represent that they know everything about Iran and how Iranians feel and what's really happening, and the president shouldn't do this or that because it's actually a bad idea, and they should know because they're Iranians. you should make clear to everyone that you can contact and influence who they are, that they're stooges, that this is regime echo chamber material, and they should be disregarded. To the extent that you are in contact with people there and you've gotten videos and you've gotten stuff, share it, make sure it's covered. And I think have faith. Have faith that this is a regime that is, whether it happens now or it happens months from now, there's an egg timer on this regime at this point. I truly believe that. If we thought about the maximum pressure campaign that we started in the first Trump administration as the victory idea of Ronald Reagan of the Soviet Union, turns out we were in the early 1980s, back in 2018, 2019. Well, it's a few years later now, and we're in the late 1980s. And I think that is pretty obvious of what is happening inside the regime. 1978 to 1979 was not a flash in the pan. It didn't happen overnight, the revolution. It happened over a year until the Shah fled. We have seen what happened in January. We've now seen students coming back out despite that maximum violence, risking their lives. This can spread again very quickly. Starlinks are being smuggled in mass. And we're already there and hugely important in getting information out early in January. So I would say it's painful. It's gut wrenching. Every time I see a report of nuclear talks and all this stuff, you just want to cry when you think about how many people were mass murdered in the streets and just the ongoing suffering of the Iranian people all these years. But I think that their moment is still to come. I don't know if it'll be next week. I don't know if it'll be next month. I don't know if it'll be this year, but this regime's end is coming.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for spending this time with us. Thanks for visiting. I look forward to welcoming you to Valley Beth Shalom in person. I know that it would mean the world to this community, and thank you for everything that you do for the American people and for the Jewish people. You're an incredible voice to have on the national scene, and you make all of us alumni from Solomon Schechter, from the Northbrook School, super proud. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to all who are watching, and look forward to being with you in person.